It was a cold, rainy night in the slums of Mtwapa. Water dripped from the roof of the tiny shack where Zalika lived with her 2 children. She was just about to feed them the last bowl of porridge they had when she heard something, a soft, heartbreaking cry coming from the alley outside. Curious and concerned, she stepped out into the storm. That's when she saw him. A small boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, stood barefoot in the mud. His clothes were soaked, his body shivering from the cold. He held a cracked, empty milk jug in his hands and stared at Zalika with wide, hollow eyes. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask for food. He just stood there, silent and broken. Zalika looked back at her own children. They were hungry too. That bowl of porridge was all they had for the night. But something in the boy's eyes touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain. Without overthinking it, she walked back inside, scooped half the porridge into a small cup, and came back out. She knelt beside him and held it out. "Here," she said softly. "Eat." The boy took it with trembling hands. He didn't smile, didn't speak. But he looked at her with something deeper than words. Something full of pain, maybe even hope. Zalika didn't know his name. She didn't know where he came from or why he was alone. But that night, in the middle of a storm, she gave a stranger her last food. What she didn't know was that this small act of kindness would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Zalika's small home was louder than usual. Her parents had come to visit without warning. As they stepped inside, they saw the boy, the same quiet barefoot child, sleeping on a mat beside Zalika's kids. He was curled up, holding his cracked milk jug like it was a blanket. Her children were still asleep, huddled close for warmth. Her mother's eyes widened in shock. "Who is that?" she asked sharply. Zalika calmly replied, "Just a child. He had nowhere else to go." Her mother's face twisted in anger. "You brought a dirty street rat into our home?" she shouted. "You shame us by feeding beggars like this?" Zalika tried to explain. "He was cold. He was hungry. What was I supposed to do? Turn him away in the rain?" But her father didn't want to hear another word. His pride was hurt, and his voice rose with fury. "You've always been soft, Zalika. Now you disgrace us by bringing street kids to sleep next to our grandchildren." Before she could respond, he grabbed a few bags and started tossing things outside. "If you want to live with beggars, then you can all go live on the street." And just like that, Zalika found herself back in the rain. No roof, no food, her children shivering beside her. The milk boy still silent, standing close to her like he belonged nowhere else. Rain soaked her clothes. Mud splashed at her feet. But she stood tall, barefoot, cold, heartbroken but not broken. She held her daughter tightly and looked up at the sky. Even with tears in her eyes, there was strength in her silence. Her parents had thrown her out, but they couldn't take away her kindness or her courage. She had nothing in her hands, but she still carried something priceless: dignity. Zalika walked through the cold, dusty streets of Campoyo, her baby girl crying softly in her arms and her young son trailing behind, tired and barefoot. She had no idea where they were going. There was no home to return to, no money in her pocket, just the hope that maybe someone somewhere would help. Her back ached from carrying her daughter, and her stomach growled, but she kept walking. The little milk boy walked beside them every step of the way. He never spoke. He never begged. He just followed quietly, clutching his empty jug, always a few steps behind. Sometimes he looked up at Zalika with tired eyes, but he never asked for anything, not even food. He ate only when she shared what little she could find. He never cried. He never complained. He just stayed close. One day, as Zalika waited near a crowded bus station, trying to find a place to rest, a kind woman noticed her shivering baby. Without a word, the woman took off her old shawl and handed it to Zalika. "Wrap her in this," she said gently. It was just a piece of worn cloth, but to Zalika, it felt like a gift from heaven. She wrapped her daughter tightly and whispered a quiet thank you, fighting back tears. That night, they found a place to sleep near a closed shop. The ground was cold, and the streetlights flickered. Zalika looked around for the milk boy, like she always did. But this time he was gone. She searched the area, called out softly, even retraced her steps the next morning. But there was no sign of him, no jug, no footprints, no clue. He had simply vanished. Zalika's heart sank. She thought maybe someone had taken him, or maybe he just wandered off, tired of following a struggling mother with no food to offer. Days passed and still nothing. Slowly, painfully, she accepted the truth. The quiet boy who never asked for anything was gone. Just like he came into her life, he had left without a word. But somehow she never forgot the way he had looked at her. Like he understood everything. It had been 3 long months since the Milkboy disappeared. Zalika was now living in a tiny hut on the edge of Campoyo, just enough to keep her children safe from the rain. Life was still hard, some days they ate, some days they didn't. But she was surviving. She still thought of the boy sometimes, wondering where he'd gone, if he was okay, if he even remembered her. One quiet afternoon as she washed clothes outside, a sleek black SUV pulled up near her hut. She froze. No one she knew drove a car like that, definitely not in this part of town. The door opened and a tall man in a suit stepped out. He looked completely out of place in the dusty street. "Miss Zalika?" he asked, his voice calm and formal. She stood up slowly, wiping her wet hands on her skirt. "Yes," she replied, unsure. He held out an envelope. Fancy paper, gold trim, her name written beautifully by hand. "You are formally invited for dinner at the Mbatha estate," he said. Zalika blinked. "The what?" "The Mbatha estate," he repeated, smiling gently. "It's a personal invitation." She carefully opened the envelope and pulled out the letter. It was short, written in neat handwriting. Her eyes scanned the words, and then stopped at the signature. Her hands began to shake. Musa Mbatha. Her heart almost stopped. That name, that handwriting, it couldn't be. But it was. The quiet, barefoot boy with the cracked milk jug, the one she fed with her last bowl of porridge, had a name. A full name. A powerful name. Zalika sat down slowly on the step of her hut, the letter still in her trembling hands. Her children looked up at her, confused, and she smiled through the shock. She didn't know how or why or what this meant. But somehow everything was about to change. And somewhere deep in her heart, she whispered, "You came back." Zalika stood in front of a tall iron gate, her heart beating faster than ever. She wore a dress that wasn't hers. It was borrowed from a kind neighbor who insisted she look her best. Her shoes were a little too big, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She looked at her children, holding their hands tightly as the gate slowly opened. This wasn't a dream. This was real. The Mbatha estate was like nothing she had ever seen. The driveway was lined with flowers and bright lights. The house itself looked like a palace, with marble floors, golden door handles, and chandeliers that sparkled like stars. Her children looked around wide-eyed, whispering "wow" under their breath. A butler guided them inside, and there at the end of a long dining table sat a young boy, dressed in a smart suit, hair neatly cut, eyes calm but kind. It was him. "Musa?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stood up, smiling. "Yes, Mama Zalika. It's me." Zalika couldn't believe her eyes. This was the same boy who once stood shivering in the rain with a broken milk jug. Now he looked like he belonged to another world. But his eyes, they were the same. Gentle, quiet, grateful. He walked over and hugged her tightly. "You saved me when I had nothing," he said softly. "Now let me return the favor." Tears filled her eyes. She had no words. Just a flood of emotions, joy, confusion, pride, relief. She had helped him without expecting anything. And yet, here he was waiting to give her everything. That night, they sat together at a table filled with food. Laughter filled the room. Her children played in the hall. For the first time in years, Zalika didn't feel tired or worried. She felt seen, respected, loved. And far away, her parents had no idea that the daughter they once threw out was now dining with royalty. Not the kind with crowns, but the kind with heart. The sun was high in the sky when the black cars began to roll into the narrow, dusty street. Engines purred, tires crunched gravel, and doors opened with a soft click. People came out of their homes to watch. Children stopped playing. Even the shopkeeper froze mid-sale. No one had ever seen such a fancy convoy in their neighborhood before. At the very front of the line sat a shining black SUV. And when the door opened, Zalika stepped out. She was dressed with quiet elegance. Nothing loud, nothing flashy, but everything about her presence was powerful. Her children stood proudly by her side, well-dressed and smiling. And right behind her stepped out Musa, now taller, sharper, and more confident than ever. He wore a suit and carried a quiet strength in his posture. But when he looked at Zalika, there was still that boyish respect in his eyes. Zalika's parents had heard the commotion and rushed outside. The moment her mother saw her, she froze. Her mouth dropped open, her voice caught in her throat. Her father stood beside her, gripping the doorframe with trembling hands. Then, something happened that no one expected. Musa walked forward and gently took Zalika's hand. He bowed his head and kissed it with deep respect. Then he turned to face the growing crowd of neighbors, villagers, and onlookers now holding up phones and snapping photos. "This woman," he said, his voice strong and clear, "taught me what family really means. When the world gave up on me, she didn't. She gave me food when she had none to spare. She gave me love when I had never known it." Cameras flashed. People gasped. Neighbors who once looked down on Zalika now stared in stunned silence. Her parents were speechless. The very daughter they had thrown out with nothing now returned with dignity, power. And the boy they had once called a street rat, standing beside her like royalty. Zalika didn't say a single word. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any speech. It started with one article. The Nairobi Daily published a story titled, "The Woman Who Fed a Future Billionaire." Zalika's face was on the front page, holding hands with Musa, smiling softly. The same woman who once stood in the rain with nothing but a bowl of porridge and a heart full of compassion. From that moment everything changed. Her story spread like wildfire. People shared it on social media with captions like, "This is what real kindness looks like," and "Never underestimate the power of one good deed." TV stations called. Influencers showed up outside her home with cameras and questions. News reporters camped by her gate just hoping to get a quote. She was invited to talk shows, podcasts, charity events. Everyone wanted to hear from the woman who changed a billionaire's life, with nothing more than love and porridge. Investors began knocking, not for money but for inspiration. They wanted to support her, partner with her, build something lasting with her. Zalika, once ignored and rejected, now had people waiting in line just to speak with her for 5 minutes. Even schools began including her story in their lessons. Teachers used her example to explain kindness, courage, and the power of small actions. Children across the country wrote essays about her. Some even called her Mama Porridge, not out of insult but out of admiration. But through all the fame, Zalika stayed grounded. She still cooked for her kids, still smiled at neighbors, still greeted strangers with warmth. The spotlight didn't change her. It only made the world finally see who she had always been. Once, people whispered in shame behind her back. Now they said her name with pride. She wasn't just a mother anymore. She was a symbol of quiet strength, of generosity without expectations, of the kind of love that doesn't ask for attention but ends up changing everything. And all of it began with one small act of kindness in the rain. One quiet evening, just as the sun was setting, Zalika heard a knock at her gate. It wasn't the press or another visitor with a camera. It was her parents. They stood there side by side, holding a small bouquet of flowers. Her mother looked nervous, her father's eyes were lowered. For a moment no one spoke. The air was thick with silence and years of pain. Her mother stepped forward first. "Zalika," she said softly, "we didn't know. We were wrong." Zalika stood still. Her heart was pounding but her face stayed calm. She had imagined this moment before many times, but now that it was real, it felt heavier than she expected. "We thought you were making a mistake," her father added quietly. "But you were doing something we didn't understand. Something we were too proud to do ourselves." Zalika looked at the flowers, then at their faces. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. The anger had burned out a long time ago, replaced by something deeper, clarity. "I didn't ask for fame," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't help that boy to make headlines. I helped him because I couldn't leave a child out in the rain." Her parents said nothing. "You didn't throw me out because I fed a stranger," she continued. "You threw me out because I chose kindness when you chose pride. You were ashamed that I loved someone you thought didn't deserve it." Tears welled in her mother's eyes. Her father's shoulders dropped. Zalika didn't yell. She didn't break down. She just took a breath, turned and walked back inside. Not with bitterness but with grace. She wasn't walking away out of hate. She was walking away because she had finally grown beyond needing their approval. That night she didn't cry. She sat with her children, holding them close, feeling peace in her chest. Forgiveness didn't always mean going back. Sometimes it meant moving forward with strength, with softness, and with a heart that still chose compassion no matter who understood it or not. One morning, as the sun rose gently over the city skyline, Musa invited Zalika to his office, a beautiful glass building in the heart of Nairobi. It was nothing like the streets they had once walked together. As she stepped inside, she was greeted with smiles, respect, and quiet admiration. But Musa wasn't calling her there just to say thank you again. He had a bigger plan. He poured her a cup of tea, then looked at her with the same serious eyes he once had as a boy holding an empty milk jug. "Mama Zalika," he said gently, "you saved my life when I was just a lost, hungry child. Now I want to save millions." He pulled out a folder and opened it. Inside were blueprints, documents, and plans for something new. A chain of nutrition centers across Kenya. Places where children in poverty could come to eat, to feel safe, to be seen. Not just one or two, but dozens, maybe even hundreds. "I want you to lead it," Musa said. "I want you to be the CEO." Zalika's hands trembled slightly as she looked through the papers. It was everything she had once prayed for without even knowing it. A way to turn all her pain, all her struggle, into something powerful. But she had one condition. "I'll do it," she said softly. "But promise me one thing, no child ever leaves hungry." "Not one." Musa nodded, emotion in his eyes. "I promise." That moment was more than just a business agreement. It was a full-circle promise. The woman who once gave her last bowl of porridge now had the power to feed thousands, maybe even more. Zalika accepted the role, not for money, not for fame, but for every child who knew the sting of hunger. Her past had broken her, but it had also built her. The struggle she once wished would end had now given her a mission. Her pain had become her purpose, and the boy she once saved had returned, not just with gratitude, but with a plan to change the world, hand in hand with the woman who first showed him what love truly meant. Today, the name Zalika is known across the country, written on the walls of schools, health clinics, food centers, and even on banners at leadership events. Her story is told in classrooms, shown in documentaries, and shared in women's groups across Africa. But once, she was just a mother with nothing but love in her hands and hope in her heart. Her children now walk confidently, well-fed and well-educated, chasing dreams she once thought were too far to reach. She sits in rooms with leaders and lawmakers, her voice strong and respected. She speaks not with fancy words but with truth, the truth of struggle, survival, and the strength of compassion. Zalika never chased fame. She never expected the world to notice. All she did was listen to a cry in the rain, share her last bowl of porridge, and open her heart to a barefoot boy with silent eyes. That one moment, small and quiet, planted a seed. And from that seed grew a garden of second chances, of full plates and full hearts, of children laughing where there used to be silence. Zalika once stood in a storm, soaked and alone, thrown out by her own parents. But now she stands tall, not just as a woman who survived, but as a woman who lifted others with her. She didn't just change one life. She changed many. And all because she chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. Sometimes changing the world doesn't start with money or power. Sometimes it starts with a bowl of porridge and a heart big enough to share it.